The little black girl told the biker her mom's signal pinged from a sealed chamber beneath the parking tower. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get started. It was a cold, windy evening when a young girl, no older than 8, ran out of the shadows of the dark parking structure. Her small figure darted across the deserted lot, her clothes torn, dirt streaked across her face, and her breath ragged from running. She ran straight toward a group of bikers who were gathered around their parked motorcycles, talking among themselves. They had just finished a long ride, their engines still rumbling in the background, but the noise of their chatter quickly died when they saw her approaching. The little girl, terrified and frantic, stumbled to a halt in front of them. Her wide, tear-filled eyes locked onto Jack, the leader of the group. She grabbed the sleeve of his leather vest, her small hands shaking violently. "Please help," she cried, her voice high-pitched and desperate. "They took my mom." Jack crouched down, his gaze softening as he met her eyes. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" he asked gently. The girl wiped her nose with her sleeve, her voice breaking as she spoke again. "My mom's in a room below the parking tower. She sent me a signal. She's trapped in a sealed chamber." Jack's heart skipped a beat. There was something in her voice, a level of fear that made him pause for a moment. This wasn't just a regular call for help. Something more was going on. The other bikers exchanged confused glances, but Jack's mind was already racing. He stood up and turned to his crew. "We need to go now," he said firmly. The urgency in his voice left no room for argument. He turned back to the girl, who was now sobbing, her tears soaking the front of his jacket. "What's your name, kid?" "Maya," she whispered, her voice shaking. "My mom's name is Sarah. She's been sending me messages for days. I don't know who took her, but they locked her up down there." Jack nodded, his mind already working on the logistics. He motioned to the other bikers, signaling them to prepare. "We're going in," he said. "Stay close, follow my lead." As the bikers revved their engines and prepared to head out, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. He glanced at Maya, her small frame shaking beside him. Whatever this was, he was determined to get to the bottom of it. They couldn't let anyone get hurt, especially not this little girl. "We'll get your mom back," he promised, as the group set off, their motorcycles echoing through the empty parking lot. The journey to uncover the truth was about to begin, and they had no idea what dangers lay ahead. The engines roared to life as Jack and his crew followed Maya, her small hand gripping the back of his leather vest. The little girl was quiet now, her earlier frantic sobs replaced by a dull, weary silence. Jack kept his eyes on the road, the headlights of his motorcycle cutting through the dark, but his mind was racing. Where was Sarah? And why was she locked in a sealed chamber beneath a parking tower? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Bear's voice crackling through the radio. "Boss, you seeing this?" Jack glanced up just in time to see a silver SUV pulling into the lot of a dilapidated building a few miles away. The same car Maya had pointed out earlier. "That's the one," Jack said, his voice low and steady. "We've got them." The group of bikers accelerated, weaving through the city streets with precision, their formation tight, as they closed in on their target. The streetlights flickered as they sped through the night, the tension rising with every passing block. Maya's breathing was shallow, but she refused to look away from the passing scenery. Jack could feel her fear, her anxiety as palpable as the night air. He needed to do this quickly. They couldn't let anyone else get hurt. "Stay close, stay sharp," Jack instructed over the comms. "We don't know what we're walking into." As they reached the parking tower, Jack cut the engine and signaled for the others to do the same. They pulled into a dark corner of the lot, hidden from view. The tower loomed ahead, its glass windows reflecting the dim moonlight. Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "This is it," he muttered, his voice filled with determination. The group dismounted, their boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. Maya stood by Jack, her eyes wide with fear as she scanned the area. "Are you sure this is where she is?" Jack asked, crouching down to her level. Maya nodded quickly. "I saw them put her in there. They locked her up. Jack turned to the others. Let's move out. No one makes a sound. The group of bikers moved in unison, their leather vests gleaming in the low light. They made their way toward the entrance, keeping to the shadows as they approached the building. Jack led the way, his eyes darting from side to side, scanning for any signs of danger. The door to the building was cracked open, just enough for them to slip through. As Jack pushed the door, it creaked loudly, causing the bikers to freeze. Stay low, Jack whispered. Inside, the air was stale, the scent of damp concrete filling their lungs. The sound of dripping water echoed through the empty hallways as they moved cautiously forward. Jack could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. He had promised Tyrone that he would protect his daughter, and now, that promise was all that mattered. He couldn't fail her. They reached the elevator, and Jack pushed the button, watching the numbers above the door slowly count down. We're almost there, he muttered, glancing back at the group. As the elevator doors opened, the smell of old machinery and grease hit them, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. They were close. The room was just down the hall, a small, sealed chamber hidden behind a thick steel door. Jack could hear the faint sound of someone moving inside. Hold on, Jack said, his voice steady. He motioned for Bear and the others to cover the exits while he approached the door. The lock was rusted, but it didn't take much for Jack to break it open. The door creaked as it swung inward, revealing a dark, cramped space. And there, lying on the cold floor, was Sarah. Her face was pale, her eyes closed, but she was alive. Jack knelt beside her, checking for signs of life. Her pulse was weak, but steady. She's alive, he whispered to the others. Get her out of here. As they lifted Sarah carefully from the floor, Jack looked back at Maya, who was standing in the doorway, watching with wide eyes. Jack gave her a reassuring nod. We got her, kid. The bikers quickly made their way back to the elevator, their footsteps echoing through the building. They couldn't stay there long. The danger wasn't over yet. They had to get Sarah to safety, and fast. As the elevator descended, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. They had uncovered something far bigger than a simple kidnapping, and he had no idea what kind of storm they were about to unleash. As the elevator doors slid open, the bikers poured into the underground parking garage, their boots echoing on the concrete floor. The air was thick with the smell of oil and exhaust fumes. Jack led the group, his heart racing as he glanced at Sarah, who was still unconscious but breathing shallowly in Bear's arms. Maya stayed close behind, her small hand gripping Jack's jacket. Her eyes were wide, full of both fear and relief. The group moved swiftly, determined to get to safety before anyone noticed their presence. They had barely made it out of the building when a flash of headlights appeared in the distance. Jack froze, his instincts kicking in. Someone's coming, he whispered. Get to the bikes. Now. The bikers quickly scattered, ducking into the shadows of the parking garage. The headlights grew closer, the sound of a car's engine rumbling steadily through the night. Jack pressed his back against the cold concrete wall, motioning for everyone to stay still. The car pulled into the garage, its engine idling as it came to a stop just a few spaces away. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as the figure inside the car leaned over to the passenger seat and opened the door. It was the same silver SUV Maya had pointed out earlier. The door swung open, and out stepped a tall man, dressed in a dark suit, his face hidden behind dark sunglasses. He looked around the garage, his eyes scanning the area, but he didn't seem to notice the group of bikers hiding in the shadows. Jack held his breath, hoping the man would leave, but as he stepped closer to the entrance, he stopped. Jack's pulse quickened as the man turned his head, his eyes narrowing as if he sensed something was wrong. The tension was thick, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. But then, the man turned and walked back toward the car. He's leaving, Jack muttered under his breath. We need to move, now. The bikers silently regrouped, quickly moving toward their bikes, their engines roaring to life as they revved to full speed. They needed to get out of there before anyone else arrived. Jack glanced back at Maya, who was still clutching his jacket tightly, her eyes full of concern. We're almost there, he said reassuringly. Stay with me. The convoy sped out of the garage, the roar of the engines cutting through the quiet night. As they hit the main road, Jack's mind raced. What was going on? Why had Sarah been locked up in that chamber beneath the parking tower? And who was the man in the silver SUV? These questions burned in his mind, but there was no time to answer them. They had to focus on getting Sarah to safety. "We're almost there," Jack repeated to himself, more for his own reassurance than for anyone else. The sun had just begun to rise when the bikers finally reached their destination. They pulled into a small, quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The streets were lined with old houses, their paint chipped and weathered by years of neglect. Jack motioned for the group to slow down as they turned down a narrow, dead-end street. They parked their bikes in front of an old, run-down house, its front porch sagging under the weight of time. Jack felt the weight of the situation settle over him as he helped Bear carefully lower Sarah onto the porch steps. She was still unconscious, her face pale and bruised, but at least she was alive. Maya stood beside Jack, watching her mother with wide, worried eyes. "Is she going to be okay?" Maya asked, her voice trembling. Jack knelt down beside her, his voice soft but steady. "She's going to be fine," he said. "We're going to take care of her, I promise." As the bikers settled in around the house, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were just getting started. They had no idea what they were up against, but one thing was clear: this wasn't just a simple rescue. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something that could change everything. Jack glanced at his crew, his brothers and sisters in the Thunderwolves MC. They had come through for him before, and they would do it again. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. "Let's get her inside," Jack said, motioning for the others to follow. "We have a lot of work to do." As they carried Sarah inside, the sound of the bike's engines faded into the distance, but the danger was far from over. Jack knew they were not safe yet. They had just uncovered a fraction of the truth, and now, they were about to dive deeper into a mystery that could tear everything apart. He only hoped they were ready for what was to come. As the door closed behind them, the small group of bikers settled into the dimly lit living room, the heavy scent of old wood and dust hanging in the air. Jack stood at the center, his hands still gripping the worn leather of his vest, his mind racing. He had promised Maya's father he would protect her, and now, here they were, trapped in a house that was as much of a mystery as the woman they had just rescued. Sarah lay in a worn armchair, still unconscious, though her breathing had become more regular. Bear, the biggest member of the Thunderwolves MC, sat on the couch across from her, his gaze never leaving the woman as if to make sure she was still alive. Maya was curled up next to Jack, her small body shaking with fear, though she tried her best to hold it together. Jack's heart ached as he looked at her. No child should have to go through this. "Is she going to be okay?" Maya whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack took a deep breath, trying to keep his tone calm. "She's strong, kid. She's going to make it through." He patted her head gently before standing up to survey the room. This wasn't just about a kidnapped mother. This was something far more dangerous. "We need to find out what happened here," Jack muttered. "We need answers." Phantom, a quiet but sharp member of the club, nodded as he stood up. "I'll check the back room," he said. "Maybe there's something there we missed." The others split off to search the house, but Jack stayed by Maya, his thoughts racing. What had Sarah gotten involved in? Who were these people who had been hunting her, and why had they gone to such lengths to lock her away? The house was eerily quiet as Jack paced the room. Maya was asleep now, her head resting against his leg. He couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. They had to finish what they had started. They had to protect Maya. He glanced at Sarah again. She had been through hell, but her condition seemed to be improving, though it was clear that she had been severely malnourished, bruised, and emotionally broken. Her condition wasn't something a simple rescue would fix. The door creaked open as Phantom stepped back into the room, a look of concern on his face. "Jack, you need to see this," he said, his voice tight with urgency. Jack followed him into the back room. It was a small office, cluttered with papers and files, but what caught Jack's attention was the computer on the desk. The screen was still on, flashing with lines of code that made no sense to him. "This isn't just a kidnapping," Phantom said, pointing at the screen. "This is bigger. Look at this." Jack leaned over, his eyes scanning the code, trying to make sense of it. His mind raced as he realized what he was seeing. "This is government-level encryption," he muttered. "What the hell is Sarah involved in?" "I don't know," Phantom replied. "But it's clear she's been working on something big. Something someone didn't want her to finish." Jack's blood ran cold. The pieces were starting to come together, but they weren't adding up in a way he liked. Sarah had been involved in something secret, something dangerous, and now, people were looking for her. But why go to such extremes? And who were they trying to protect her from? Jack turned back to Maya, who was still sleeping on the couch. She was safe for now, but for how long? He had to find out what Sarah had gotten herself into, and more importantly, what she had been trying to stop. They needed answers. We need to find out who's behind this, Jack said, determination hardening his voice. And we need to do it fast. The longer we wait, the more dangerous this gets. Just as he said those words, the sound of a distant car engine reached his ears. It was low at first, but it grew louder, quickly approaching. Jack's hand instinctively reached for his phone, dialing the number for the club's lawyer. "Bonds, we've got a problem," he said as soon as the line clicked open. "I need you to track down any information on a government project. I'm talking classified stuff. We're dealing with something serious." As he hung up, the noise outside intensified. He walked back to the window and peered out. The headlights of a car were visible, cutting through the darkness of the street. Jack's instincts screamed at him that they weren't safe here. Not anymore. "Everyone, get ready," he barked. "We need to move." The bikers scrambled into action, quickly gathering their gear and making sure Sarah was secure. Maya woke up with a start, her eyes wide with confusion. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice shaking. Jack knelt beside her. "We're leaving," he said softly. "But I need you to trust me, okay? We're not letting anything happen to you." Maya nodded, though the fear in her eyes was impossible to hide. Jack's heart broke for her. No child should ever have to go through what she was facing. But he would make sure she came out of this alive. He would make sure they both did. As they moved out, Jack looked over at the approaching car. This was far from over. They had just uncovered the tip of the iceberg. And the real danger? It was just beginning. The tension was palpable as Jack and the bikers moved quickly through the darkened streets, their bikes roaring to life one by one. The streets were eerily quiet, but Jack's senses were heightened. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Maya was still with him, her small body trembling as she clutched his jacket tightly. She had no idea what was really going on, but Jack could see the fear in her eyes, the kind of fear no child should ever have to experience. He didn't know what the hell they were up against, but one thing was clear. This was no ordinary rescue mission. They had just uncovered something much bigger than they had anticipated. The group continued to ride in silence, the sound of their engines breaking the night's stillness. The streetlights flickered as they passed, casting long shadows on the pavement. Jack glanced at Bear, who was riding beside him. His face was grim, his focus unwavering. The rest of the bikers were following close behind, their eyes scanning the road ahead. "Keep your heads up," Jack said into the radio. "We don't know who's tracking us yet." Bear gave a slight nod, signaling that he understood. Jack's thoughts kept drifting back to Sarah and to what they had found in the office earlier. The computer, the encrypted files, it all pointed to something far more dangerous than a simple kidnapping. Jack had no doubt that Sarah had stumbled upon something she wasn't supposed to. And now, whoever was behind this would stop at nothing to make sure she didn't expose it. As they neared the outskirts of town, Jack's mind raced. They needed a plan, and fast. They couldn't just keep running forever. They needed answers. And they needed to figure out who the hell was pulling the strings. "We need to get to Bonds," Jack muttered to himself, speaking more to the night air than anyone else. Bonds was their lawyer, and Jack trusted him more than anyone. He would know what to do next. He reached for his phone, quickly dialing Bonds' number. The phone rang twice before Bonds picked up. "Jack, what's going on?" Bonds' voice was calm, but Jack could hear the concern underneath. "We're being hunted," Jack said bluntly. "We found something big. Something they don't want us to know. I need you to get us some answers." There was a pause on the other end. "You're not messing around, are you?" Bonds said. "I'll get on it. Meet me at the old warehouse on 4th Street. I've got a safe house there. It's the best place to lay low for now." "We'll be there in 15, Jack said. He hung up and glanced at the others. "We've got a meeting with Bonds. He's got a safe house ready for us. We need to regroup and figure out our next move." The bikers nodded in agreement, their faces set in determination. They knew this was just the beginning. They rode hard, the engines roaring as they pushed through the night, heading for the warehouse on 4th Street. As they arrived, the warehouse loomed ahead, a large, abandoned building with rusted metal doors and broken windows. Jack signaled for everyone to pull up to the side. The warehouse was dark, but Jack could see the faint glow of lights from inside. They were safe for now, but Jack knew it wouldn't be long before the people hunting them would figure out where they were. Stay close, Jack said, his voice low. We don't know who's inside. As they entered the warehouse, the sound of their footsteps echoed in the large, empty space. Jack could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. The warehouse was filled with old furniture and boxes, but there was a clean space near the back, lit by a single lamp. Bonds was waiting there, his arms crossed as he leaned against a stack of crates. He was an older man, tall and wiry, with a calm demeanor that put Jack at ease. Jack, it's good to see you, Bonds said, his eyes scanning the group. I take it you found something, and it's not good. Not good at all, Jack replied. We found encrypted files. Someone's been tracking Sarah, and now they're after us. I don't know who's behind this, but I need you to find out. Bonds nodded slowly, his face serious. I'll get to work on it right away. But you need to be careful. If they're watching Sarah, they're watching you now. I know, Jack said, his voice tight. We're not going to let them get to her. He turned to the others. We need to protect Maya and Sarah at all costs. No one gets to hurt them. As Jack spoke, he could feel the weight of the situation settle in. They were in over their heads, but there was no turning back now. They had to push forward, no matter the cost. He glanced at Maya, who was sitting quietly on one of the crates, her eyes wide with confusion. She had no idea just how dangerous this was, but Jack wasn't about to let anyone take her from him. They were family now, and family protected each other. We'll get through this, Jack whispered to himself, as much for his own reassurance as anyone else. We're not backing down. The warehouse was quiet except for the sound of their boots against the cold concrete floor. The bikers, exhausted from the ride, formed a circle around Jack and Bonds. Jack's thoughts were still racing. What was Sarah involved in? Who were they really up against? And how far were they willing to go to stop him from uncovering the truth? He glanced at Maya, who was sitting quietly, her small face tense with worry. She had no idea how deep this went, but Jack was determined to protect her, no matter what. Bonds broke the silence. I've made some calls, he said, his voice calm, but there was a hint of concern behind it. This is bigger than I thought. The encryption you found isn't just some random code, it's government level. And from what I can tell, it's tied to a project that was shut down years ago. What kind of project? Jack asked, stepping closer. I don't have all the details yet, but it's something dangerous, Bonds replied. Sarah was involved in something she shouldn't have been. I think she stumbled onto something they were trying to hide. And now, they're trying to clean up the mess. Jack's grip tightened on his jacket. We need to get ahead of this. What can we do? Bonds looked around at the group, his gaze settling on the bikers. You need to be careful. If they're watching Sarah, they're watching all of you now. They'll stop at nothing to keep this quiet. Jack nodded, his face hardening. We're not backing down. He turned to his crew. Get ready. We're going to need all the help we can get. But we have to move fast. The longer we stay here, the more likely it is they'll find us. Bear stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the doorway. We'll be ready, he said, his voice low but steady. Just tell us what to do. Jack took a deep breath. We need to find out who's behind this and why. We can't let anyone else get hurt. The bikers nodded in agreement, their faces set in determination. Jack turned back to Bonds. I need you to keep digging. Find out who we're really up against and what their endgame is. I don't care what it takes, but we need answers. Bonds gave a curt nod. I'll do what I can. But be prepared. This isn't going to be easy. With that, Jack gave a short, sharp nod, signaling for the others to get ready. They couldn't stay at the warehouse for long. The next few hours would determine everything. The sound of motorcycles revving echoed through the warehouse as the bikers gathered their things and made their way outside. The cold night air hit them like a wall as they stepped into the parking lot. The faint glow of the streetlights cast long shadows across the lot, but Jack's eyes were sharp, scanning every corner. He felt like they were being watched. He could feel it in his bones. As they prepared to leave, Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the message from Bonds. I've got a lead. Meet me at the old mill on the outskirts of town. Don't take the main roads. They'll be looking for you. Jack's pulse quickened. This was it. This was the break they needed. You heard him, Jack said to the crew. We move now. Stay off the main roads. Keep it quiet. Let's go. The bikers fired up their engines and sped off into the night, the sound of their motorcycles filling the empty streets. The air was cold, biting at their faces as they rode in silence, their minds focused on the task ahead. Jack's thoughts kept drifting back to Sarah. What had she uncovered? And why was it so important to the people who were hunting her? The ride felt like it lasted hours, though it had only been a short time before they reached the outskirts of town. The old mill was a crumbling building, its windows broken and boarded up, surrounded by a large, overgrown yard. The bikers parked at a distance, keeping out of sight. Jack led the group toward the mill, his heart pounding in his chest. As they approached the entrance, Jack signaled for everyone to stay close. The mill was silent, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind in the trees. Jack's instincts were on high alert. He could feel that they were getting closer to the truth. They reached the door, and Jack paused for a moment, listening for any sounds from inside. Nothing. Slowly, he pushed the door open. The creak of the hinges echoed in the stillness as the bikers slipped inside, their eyes adjusting to the darkness. The mill was massive, the air thick with dust and the smell of old machinery. Jack could barely make out the outlines of old equipment in the dim light. They moved cautiously, careful not to make a sound. As they ventured deeper into the building, they found a staircase leading to the upper level. Jack nodded to Bear, who motioned for the others to follow. The group made their way up, their footsteps heavy on the creaking stairs. At the top, Jack found a small office, its door slightly ajar. He motioned for the group to stop. Inside, a desk sat covered in papers, old files scattered around. But it was the laptop on the desk that caught Jack's attention. The screen was on, the bright glow of the monitor reflecting the dust-covered walls. He stepped closer, his fingers trembling slightly as he opened the laptop. On the screen was a map, a set of coordinates marked in red. Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the key to everything. "We've found it," Jack whispered, his voice filled with determination. "This is where it ends." The bikers gathered around, their eyes scanning the screen. The coordinates pointed to a location just outside the city, a place that Jack knew well. It was a government facility, one that had been closed off for years. Jack knew that if they didn't act fast, they would be too late. "We need to move," Jack said. "No more waiting. We're going in." The air was thick with anticipation as Jack and the bikers sped down the road, the rumbling engines of their motorcycles vibrating through their bodies. The coordinates had led them to a secluded area just outside the city, a place Jack recognized from his past, but one that no one dared to visit anymore. A government facility that had been abandoned for years, its secrets buried deep within its walls. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the ground as they approached the entrance. Jack could feel the weight of what they were about to do. This was no longer just a rescue mission. It was a war, and they were walking straight into the heart of it. The bikers pulled up to the gates, the facility looming in front of them like a dark fortress. The gate was locked, but that didn't stop them. Bear, as always, was the first to act. With one powerful kick, he knocked down the rusted metal barrier, and the group pushed forward, moving swiftly and silently. Jack glanced back at Maya, who was clinging to his side. She hadn't said much since they left the warehouse, but Jack could tell she was scared. She was just a kid, caught in the middle of a war she didn't understand. He wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but deep down, Jack knew the truth. Nothing was okay. Not yet. They moved past the gate and into the overgrown yard of the facility. The building was huge, its windows broken and covered with thick layers of dust and grime. There were no lights on, no sounds coming from inside. But Jack knew better than to trust the silence. "Stay alert," he muttered, his voice low. "We don't know what we're dealing with." The bikers spread out, covering all angles as they approached the front door. Jack could feel his pulse quicken as he grabbed the handle and turned. The door creaked open with a sound that echoed through the empty halls. They stepped inside, their boots making a soft thud as they walked across the concrete floor. The place was a labyrinth of old machinery and abandoned offices, but there was no time to waste. They had to find Sarah, and fast. As they moved deeper into the building, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Jack's heart skipped a beat. "We're not alone," he whispered. The bikers moved into position, their eyes scanning the dark corners of the room, waiting for any sign of movement. The footsteps grew louder, and soon, Jack could see shadows moving down the hallway. He held up a hand, signaling for everyone to stop. The group huddled together, ready for whatever was coming their way. As the shadows drew closer, Jack could make out the shape of a man, tall and muscular, with a dark suit and a face that seemed to blend into the darkness. The man stopped just short of the entrance, his eyes darting around the room, scanning for any signs of intruders. Jack's muscles tensed, his hand instinctively going to the handle of his gun, but before he could make a move, the man turned and disappeared into the shadows. "We've got company," Jack muttered. "Stay low. Don't let them know we're here." The bikers crept forward, following Jack's. As they moved through the building, the deeper they went, the more the air seemed to thicken, the silence pressing in on them like a heavy blanket. It wasn't long before they reached the heart of the facility. The door in front of them was made of solid steel, its surface scratched and dented from years of neglect. Jack pushed it open with a low creak, revealing a large, dimly lit room. In the center of the room, there was a small metal table, surrounded by machines that hummed quietly in the background. And there, lying on the table, was Sarah. She was pale, her body still, but alive. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he stepped forward, his eyes scanning her fragile form. "She's here," he whispered, relief flooding through him. But as he reached out to touch her arm, something stopped him. A low voice echoed from the shadows. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Jack froze. The voice was cold, threatening, and it sent a chill down his spine. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as a figure stepped out from the darkness. It was the man in the suit, and this time, he wasn't alone. Two more men, both armed and ready for a fight, flanked him on either side. Jack felt the tension in the air rise, the room suddenly feeling much smaller. "Who are you?" Jack asked, his voice steady but full of suspicion. The man in the suit smiled, a cold, calculated grin that made Jack's blood run cold. "I'm the one who makes sure things stay buried," he said. "And right now, you're in the way." Jack's grip tightened on his gun. He didn't know who these men were, but it didn't matter. They had crossed a line, and now, they were going to pay. The bikers moved into position, surrounding the men. Jack's eyes locked onto the man in the suit. "You don't scare me," Jack growled. "You're not getting away with this." The man's grin faded slightly, his eyes narrowing. "We'll see about that." With a quick motion, he pulled out a gun, aiming it straight at Jack's chest. Jack didn't flinch. He was ready for this. But before the man could pull the trigger, a shot rang out, echoing through the building. The man in the suit collapsed to the ground, his gun slipping from his hand. Jack turned to see Bear standing behind him, his rifle still smoking. "You weren't going to do this alone, were you?" Bear said with a smirk. Jack's heart raced as he looked at Sarah, still unconscious on the table. They had their first victory, but the war was far from over. He had a feeling this was just the beginning. The sound of the man in the suit hitting the floor echoed through the room as the bikers moved in. Jack's heart was still racing, but there was no time for relief. They'd taken down the first wave, but they were far from finished. The room was still tense, thick with the adrenaline of the moment. Bear moved forward, keeping his rifle aimed at the two remaining men who had been with the suit, ensuring they wouldn't try anything stupid. Jack stepped closer to Sarah, his eyes scanning her fragile form. Her breath was shallow, her body limp, but she was alive. That was the only thing that mattered right now. He gently placed a hand on her arm, feeling the faint pulse beneath her skin. Maya stood nearby, her face a mix of worry and relief. Jack could see the toll this was taking on her. She had been through so much in such a short time. Jack wanted to comfort her, tell her everything would be okay, but he knew that wasn't the truth. Not yet. They were still in danger. "We need to move her," Jack said, his voice steady despite the chaos that still simmered around them. "Get her to the bikes. We're not safe here." The bikers, now on high alert, nodded and quickly moved into action. They carefully lifted Sarah, each of them working together to make sure she was stable and secure. Jack glanced at the two men who were still on the floor, groaning but clearly still alive. They wouldn't be a problem for now, but Jack wasn't taking any chances. He motioned for Bear to keep an eye on them. "Don't let them move," Jack instructed, "and make sure they know they're not going anywhere until we're gone." Bear grinned, a flash of his usual dark humor showing through. "Got it, boss. They're not going anywhere." As the bikers moved Sarah toward the door, Jack stayed close to Maya. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "What now?" she asked, her voice small. Jack knelt down beside her, offering a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Now we get out of here. We're not done yet, kid." but we're going to keep you safe. I promise. Maya nodded, though Jack could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. He hated that she had to go through this, but he knew there was no turning back. The truth was, they were all in this together now. As they made their way back through the building, Jack kept his senses sharp. He knew they couldn't afford any more surprises. They'd barely made it out once. They needed to get to the bikes, fast, and figure out their next move. They moved through the facility, careful not to make any noise. The building felt like it was closing in on them, the silence broken only by the sound of their footsteps. Jack's mind raced as he replayed everything that had happened. What had they uncovered? And why were they being hunted? It didn't add up. But the one thing Jack knew for sure was that they had to keep moving. As they neared the exit, Jack stopped in his tracks. There was a noise, a faint sound that seemed to come from the hallway ahead. It wasn't the usual sounds of the building settling. It was footsteps. Someone was coming. Get down, Jack hissed, pulling Maya behind a stack of crates. The bikers quickly took cover, their guns ready. Jack's mind raced. They couldn't let anyone know they were here. Not yet. The footsteps grew louder, and Jack's pulse quickened. He motioned for the others to stay low. Every muscle in his body tensed as he prepared for the worst. The sound stopped just as suddenly as it had started. Jack could hear the faint scrape of boots against the floor, the sound of a door opening. He held his breath, waiting for the next move. Moments passed, and still, there was nothing. Jack slowly raised his head, peering around the corner of the crates. The hallway was empty. His eyes narrowed. Something wasn't right. They were too close to the exit now. There should have been more noise, more movement. Jack turned back to the bikers. We need to move, now, he said, his voice low but firm. We don't know who's coming, but we can't afford to be caught in here. The bikers nodded, and they moved quickly toward the exit, making sure to stay low and quiet. They reached the door, and Jack opened it just enough to peek outside. The coast was clear. He motioned for everyone to follow. Let's go, he whispered. They slipped out of the building, their footsteps soft against the pavement. The motorcycles were just a short distance away, parked out of sight behind a row of trees. Jack's heart beat faster as he approached his bike, ready to get out of there. The bikers mounted their motorcycles, the engines coming to life one by one, their sound breaking the silence of the night. Jack looked over at Maya, who was now sitting behind him, gripping his jacket tightly. You good? Jack asked, his voice soft. Maya nodded, though her face was still pale, her eyes wide with fear. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Jack turned his head to look at her, offering a reassuring smile. I know, kid, but we're getting out of here, and we're not stopping until you're safe. As they rode off into the night, Jack's mind raced with the next steps. He had no idea who was after them, or what they had uncovered, but one thing was certain. The fight was far from over. They had only just begun. The sound of roaring engines filled the night as Jack and his crew sped down the deserted highway, the wind whipping past them, cold and unforgiving. The tension was thick, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. Sarah was still unconscious, lying across Bear's lap in the back of the convoy. Maya sat behind Jack, clutching him tightly, her small form trembling with fear. Jack kept his eyes on the road ahead, but his thoughts were miles away. They had narrowly escaped the government facility, but the real danger was just beginning. The people hunting Sarah, hunting them, were not going to stop. Jack could feel it in his bones. This was no longer about just saving Sarah. It was about survival. The convoy weaved through the night, Jack's mind racing with questions. What was Sarah involved in? What had they uncovered that was so dangerous that someone was willing to kill to keep it quiet? Jack didn't have the answers, but he was determined to find them. The road ahead was dark, the occasional flicker of streetlights casting long, eerie shadows on the pavement. They were close to the border of the city, and Jack could feel the tension building. We need to find somewhere safe, Jack muttered, his voice low, barely audible over the sound of the bikes. A place to regroup. Bear, who had been leading the convoy, nodded. There's a cabin up ahead. It's isolated. We'll be able to lay low for a while. Perfect, Jack replied. Let's get there as quickly as we can. The convoy sped up, the engines growling as they pushed forward. The cabin wasn't far, but every minute felt like an eternity. The thought of being pursued, hunted, was always on Jack's mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. As they neared the cabin, Jack could see it in the distance, a small, run-down building surrounded by trees. The place looked abandoned, but that was exactly what they needed. The convoy pulled in behind the cabin, parking their bikes in the shadows, away from any potential prying eyes. Jack scanned the area, making sure they weren't being followed. Satisfied that the coast was clear, he motioned for the others to dismount. The bikers moved quickly, unloading their gear and securing the area. Jack turned to Bear, who was already helping Sarah out of the back of the convoy. "We'll set up camp inside," Jack said. "Get Sarah on the couch and keep her comfortable." Bear nodded, carefully lifting Sarah and carrying her inside. Jack followed, making sure Maya was close behind. The cabin was small, with old wooden beams and creaky floors. It smelled of must and age, but it was a shelter, and right now, that was all that mattered. Jack pulled the shades down, blocking out any light that might attract attention. He then made his way to the back of the cabin, where the others were setting up. The mood was heavy, the reality of what they had just done weighing on them. Jack walked over to the table, pulling out his phone. There were no new messages, no updates from Bonds. He knew that their lawyer would be digging into the details, but they couldn't afford to wait. Jack needed answers. The sound of footsteps behind him made him turn. It was Maya, standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with worry. "Is Mom going to be okay?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. Jack felt a pang of guilt in his chest. He hated seeing the fear in her eyes, but he couldn't lie to her. "She's going to be okay," Jack said, his voice firm, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. Maya nodded, but Jack could see the doubt in her eyes. He reached out and pulled her into a tight hug, trying to offer her the comfort she so desperately needed. "We're going to get through this," Jack whispered. Maya clung to him for a moment, her small body shaking. She was just a kid, but she had already seen things no one should ever have to see. Jack let go of her and turned back to the group. "We need to stay alert," he said. "This is just the beginning. We don't know who's after us, or why they're doing this, but we need to be ready for whatever comes next." The bikers nodded in agreement, their faces set with determination. They were all in this together now. They weren't just fighting for Sarah anymore. They were fighting for their lives. The night passed slowly. Jack didn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the men they had taken down in the facility, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The silence outside was unnerving. No cars, no lights, just the sound of the wind rustling the trees. The morning came, cold and gray. Jack paced the small cabin, his mind working through their next steps. They couldn't stay here long. The government was looking for them, and they would stop at nothing to find Sarah and everyone connected to her. He needed to move, to find out what Sarah had uncovered before it was too late. He walked over to the table where the laptop was still open. He could see the encrypted files still on the screen, but they were just the beginning. There were other documents hidden in the system, and Jack was determined to dig them out. He needed answers, and he was going to get them, no matter what it took. Just then, his phone buzzed again. This time it was Bonds. "Jack, I've got something. Meet me at the safe house. It's time to take this fight to them." Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment he'd been waiting for. The war was about to begin. The sun was just starting to rise when Jack received the message from Bonds. His heart pounded as he read the text. "I've got what you need. Meet me at the safe house." He turned to Bear, who was sitting by the window, keeping a lookout. "We're moving out," Jack said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. Bear nodded, standing up and grabbing his gear. The bikers were already preparing to leave, knowing that the next phase of their plan had begun. Jack glanced at Maya, who was sitting on the couch, her eyes filled with concern. She hadn't said much since the night before, but Jack knew that fear still gripped her. The truth was, no one knew exactly what they were up against. Whoever was after them had the resources, the power, and the will to destroy everything in their path. And now, it was their turn to fight back. "You ready, kid?" Jack asked, his voice soft as he crouched beside Maya. She looked up at him, her small face drawn with worry, but there was a glimmer of something else in her eyes, determination. "I'm ready," she whispered. Jack smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good. Stay close." The group of bikers gathered outside the cabin, their motorcycles roaring to life as they lined up. Jack took one last look at the cabin, knowing it would likely be the last time they saw it. The war was moving forward, and they couldn't afford to wait any longer. The safe house was on the outskirts of the city, in a quiet, nondescript neighborhood. It wasn't much, just a small house that Bonds had rented for emergencies. The bikers sped through the streets, their engines a loud reminder of their presence, but they kept their speed in check, knowing that the last thing they needed was to attract attention. Jack's mind was focused on the meeting ahead. Bonds had always been their ally, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the lawyer was keeping something from them. They had barely scratched the surface of whatever Sarah had uncovered, and now it seemed like the pieces were starting to fall into place. The government was involved. The project Sarah had been part of, whatever it was clearly something they didn't want anyone to know about. As they approached the safe house, Jack could see Bonds standing at the door, waiting for them. His posture was tense, his eyes scanning the street behind him. When Jack pulled up, Bonds stepped forward, his face grim. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Get inside. It's not safe out here." The bikers followed him into the house, locking the door behind them. The small living room was cluttered with papers and old files, but there was no time to waste. "What's going on?" Jack asked, his tone demanding answers. Bonds motioned for them to sit, his eyes darting around the room as if checking for eavesdroppers. "I've been digging into the files you found. It's worse than I thought," Bonds said. He pulled out a thick manila folder and opened it, revealing documents and photographs. Sarah wasn't just a part of some research project. She was working on a covert operation, one that's linked to a government black site. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. A black site? That meant they were dealing with something far beyond what he had imagined. "What kind of operation?" Jack asked. Bonds hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor before meeting Jack's eyes again. The project Sarah was involved in was designed to create advanced surveillance technology. It was supposed to be used for national security, but it quickly became something else, something dangerous. "Dangerous how?" Bear asked, his voice low and steady. "The technology they were developing could track and manipulate anyone, anywhere. It's the kind of thing that could destroy lives, ruin entire communities," Bonds explained. Sarah didn't want any part of it. She tried to leave, but they wouldn't let her. "Who wouldn't let her?" Jack pressed. "The government? The agency in charge of this project?" "It's worse than that," Bonds said, lowering his voice. "There's a group within the government, high-level officials, who were running the show. They use Sarah's research for other purposes. They want to control the entire country's communication networks, its infrastructure. And they'll do anything to keep this under wraps." Jack's mind was racing. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. This was bigger than anything he could have imagined. The government, a rogue faction within it, was trying to control everything. And Sarah had been caught in the middle. "How do we stop them?" Jack asked, his voice filled with determination. Bonds looked around the room, his eyes flickering with worry. "We can't stop them, Jack. Not on our own. They have too much power. But I've got a plan." Jack leaned forward, eager for any lead, any way to take the fight to them. "What's the plan?" "I have contacts," Bonds said, pulling out a phone and tapping it. "People who can help. But it's going to be dangerous. They'll be watching us the entire time." Jack nodded. "We're ready." He looked at Maya, who was standing quietly in the corner. "Stay close, kid. We're getting through this. Together." Maya nodded, her eyes full of fear but also something else, something Jack had seen in fighters, in people who refused to give up. "We'll do whatever it takes," Jack said. "Let's get started." The bikers gathered their gear, ready for whatever came next. Jack knew the path ahead would be perilous, but he wasn't backing down. Not when so much was at stake. They had uncovered the first layer of the conspiracy, and now it was time to dig deeper. The fight was just beginning, and Jack wasn't going to stop until he had the answers. Not for Sarah, not for Maya, but for all of them. The sun was barely up, casting a pale light over the safe house as Jack paced back and forth, his mind still racing. He had known the stakes were high, but now it was clear. What they were up against wasn't just about Sarah or the government's dangerous experiments. This was a fight for control of everything. The technology Sarah had worked on was only the beginning. The people behind it wanted more than just power. They wanted to reshape the very foundations of society, and they would stop at nothing to silence anyone who stood in their way. Jack could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on him. He had promised to keep Maya safe, but with every step, the danger grew. The stakes were too high to back down now. He had to keep going. He had to fight for her, for Sarah, and for everyone who had been caught in the crossfire of this corrupt conspiracy. The others were gathering their gear, preparing for the next move. Bear was checking the bikes, making sure everything was in order. Phantom was at the table, scanning through the files they had retrieved, looking for any more clues. Maya was sitting quietly in the corner, her small hands clenched together, her eyes filled with uncertainty. Jack could see the fear in her, but there was also something else, a spark of resilience. She wasn't going to break, no matter how hard it got. That was what kept Jack going. He couldn't let her down. He wouldn't. "We're ready to move," Bear said, walking over to Jack, his eyes serious. "Where are we headed?" Jack looked at the map spread out on the table in front of them. It was marked with locations, coordinates, and a red circle around one particular spot, an abandoned research facility deep in the woods, far away from the city. "This is where we find out what's really going on," Jack said, his voice steady. "We need to hit them hard, take them by surprise." Phantom looked up from the table, his face tight. "This place is off the grid," he said. "No one knows about it. If they're hiding something, that's where it's going to be." Jack nodded. "Exactly. We're going in. No more waiting." They gathered their gear and mounted their bikes, the sound of the engines rumbling through the air as they revved to life. Jack could feel the tension in the air as they rode, the weight of what they were about to do settling over him. It wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. This was the beginning of something much bigger. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for control. As they made their way through the winding roads, the scenery became more desolate. The city's lights faded into the distance, replaced by dense trees and thick fog that seemed to swallow everything in its path. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the sound of their bikes and the occasional crack of a branch in the distance. Jack's mind was still racing. What had Sarah uncovered? What was in that facility? And who were they really up against? He could feel the answers slipping further away, but he couldn't let them get away with it. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. The facility finally came into view, its looming structure hidden among the trees, barely visible through the mist. It looked abandoned, run down, but Jack knew better. This place wasn't just a forgotten building. It was a fortress, and they were about to break in. The bikers pulled up to the entrance, parking their motorcycles in the shadows. Jack motioned for them to stay low as they approached the large steel door. He knew they didn't have much time. They had to get in, get the information, and get out before anyone noticed they were there. "We move fast," Jack whispered. "In and out. No mistakes." Bear nodded, his eyes sharp, already scanning the area. Phantom stayed close, his hand on his weapon, ready for anything. Jack pushed the door open slowly, the sound of the hinges creaking in the silence. They slipped inside, moving cautiously through the dark corridors, their footsteps muffled by the thick dust on the floor. The building felt cold, sterile, like a place that had been abandoned for years. But Jack knew it wasn't. It was alive, hidden beneath the surface, and they were about to uncover its secrets. The further they went into the building, the more intense the feeling of danger grew. Jack could sense it in the air, in the way the shadows seemed to move, in the silence that followed them at every step. The deeper they went, the more it felt like they were walking into the heart of the beast. They reached a large, locked door at the end of the hallway. Jack motioned for the others to stop, his hand on the handle. He tried the door, but it was locked. Vaughn said they'd keep everything locked up tight. Jack muttered, his frustration mounting. "We'll have to break it open." Bear stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the door as he pulled out a crowbar. "Let me handle this," he said. With a few swift movements, Bear pried the door open, the metal groaning as it gave way. They stepped inside, their eyes adjusting to the low light. The room was filled with computers, monitors, and equipment, all humming quietly in the background. Jack's heart raced as he took in the scene. This was it. This was the heart of the operation. He quickly moved to one of the terminals, his fingers flying over the keys as he searched for any information they could use. His eyes widened as he pulled up a file labeled Project Revelation. It was encrypted, but Jack's training kicked in. He worked quickly, bypassing the security protocols and unlocking the file. What he saw next made his blood run cold. It was worse than he had imagined. The project was far more advanced than they had thought. It wasn't just surveillance. It was mind control. And Sarah had been the key. Jack slammed the laptop shut, his mind racing. They had to stop this. Whatever it took. They were too late to stop the project from being created, but they could still destroy it. They had to. "We've got to shut this down," Jack said, his voice full of determination. "No matter what, we can't let this go any further." The bikers stood in silence, each of them understanding the gravity of the situation. They had come this far. Now, it was time to finish it. Jack didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. They weren't leaving until it was over. The room was thick with tension as Jack stood over the terminal, his mind racing with the information he had just uncovered. The documents on the screen revealed the true extent of the operation. Project Revelation was far worse than he had ever imagined. It wasn't just about surveillance or tracking people's movements. It was about total control. They had been building a system capable of manipulating human thoughts and actions, a system so advanced that it could turn anyone into a puppet, forced to follow commands without question. Jack's hands trembled as he turned to the others. "This has to be stopped. We can't let them use this technology. If it gets out, if it's put into action, the entire country will be at risk." Bear nodded grimly. "So what's the plan, Jack?" Jack's mind was spinning. They had gotten this far, but there was still so much to do. They couldn't just leave the facility with Sarah and call it a day. The project had to be destroyed, every trace of it wiped off the face of the earth. They couldn't let the people behind it continue. Jack glanced at Maya, who was standing in the corner, her eyes filled with confusion. She had no idea what this project was, or what was at stake. Jack wished he could explain it to her, tell her that this was all for her future. But all he could do was promise her that they were going to finish this. "We need to destroy everything in this facility," Jack said. "We wipe out every file, every system, and make sure nothing gets out. We're not leaving until it's all gone." "Got it," Phantom said, his voice steady. "We'll cover the exits. Make sure no one else gets in or out." "Good," Jack replied, his eyes still on the terminal. "Let's get to work." The bikers moved into action, their footsteps echoing through the abandoned facility as they spread out to take control of the building. Jack stayed by the terminal, working quickly to disable the system, deleting the files one by one, making sure that nothing remained. It was a race against time. The government would be coming for them soon, and they needed to finish what they had started before anyone could stop them. As Jack worked, he could hear the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway. His heart skipped a beat. "We've got company," he muttered. He quickly stood up and motioned for the others to take cover. Bear and Phantom moved silently, their guns ready. Jack felt the adrenaline surge through him as he crouched behind a stack of crates, waiting for the intruders to arrive. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Jack could see shadows moving under the door. His hand tightened on the grip of his gun. He wasn't going to let anyone stand in their way. The door burst open, and in rushed a group of armed men. Jack's eyes narrowed as he recognized them. More of the government agents who had been hunting them. This wasn't just a random security breach. They had known they were coming. The men immediately raised their weapons, their eyes locking onto Jack. "You're too late," Jack said, his voice cold. "This ends now." Before the men could react, Bear and Phantom opened fire, their shots precise and deadly. The agents dropped to the ground, their weapons clattering as they hit the floor. Jack didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, checking for any signs of life, but there was nothing. They were all down. He motioned for the others to move quickly. "Let's finish this," Jack said, his voice unwavering. As they moved deeper into the facility, Jack could feel the weight of what they were doing. This wasn't just a raid. It was the end of everything they had uncovered. Every file, every piece of data, every scrap of evidence had to be destroyed. There was no room for failure. "We're almost there," Jack said, glancing back at the others. "Just a few more minutes." They reached the heart of the operation, a large control room filled with computers and equipment. Jack's heart pounded as he saw the scale of what they were dealing with. This was where it all started, where the project had been built and operated. He moved to the main terminal, his fingers flying over the keys as he worked to shut it all down. "I need access to the master files," Jack said. "We need to wipe everything." Phantom moved quickly, hacking into the system and bypassing the security protocols. Within seconds, the screen went blank, the files disappearing as they were deleted. Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. It was done. The project was over. But as they turned to leave, Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his eyes scanning the message. It was from Bonds. "They know you're here. Get out now." Jack's stomach dropped. He didn't need to ask who they were. The government was coming for them, and they were running out of time. "Move," Jack yelled. The bikers sprinted toward the exit, their hearts pounding as they raced against the clock. They had done what they came to do, but now they had to escape before it was too late. As they reached the bikes, Jack could see the flashing lights of approaching vehicles in the distance. They had to get out of there, and fast. Go, go, Jack shouted, revving his engine and leading the group out of the facility. The sound of sirens filled the air as they sped down the road, the wind rushing past them, the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. They were on the run, but they had one thing the government didn't: the truth. And they weren't going to stop until everyone knew what had really happened. The roar of the engines echoed through the night as Jack and his crew sped down the highway, their bikes cutting through the darkness with a sense of urgency. The flashing lights in the rearview mirror grew fainter, but the feeling of being hunted, pursued by forces that would stop at nothing, didn't fade. They had escaped, but Jack knew the danger wasn't over. Not yet. Not by a long shot. The government, whoever was behind this, was still after them, still trying to cover their tracks, to bury what they had uncovered. But this time, it was different. They weren't just running. They had the truth now, and that made them stronger. The weight of their mission pressed down on Jack as he glanced at Sarah, who was resting against Bear, her body weak but stable. The last few days had taken a toll on all of them, physically and mentally. But they were alive. That was what mattered. And they had done it. They had exposed the truth. The project, the lies, the manipulation, it was all out in the open now. No more secrets. We need to keep moving, Jack said, breaking the silence. He could feel the tension in the air, the need to keep going, to never stop. They couldn't afford to slow down. We have to get to Bonds. The safe house wasn't far now, a place where they could regroup, where they could figure out their next steps. The bikers rode on, their focus unwavering. Jack glanced behind him at Maya, who was riding close by. Her face was tired, her eyes heavy, but there was a strength in her that Jack hadn't seen before. She had come a long way from the terrified little girl he had first met. She had seen the world for what it truly was, and yet, she was still standing. We're almost there, Jack said softly, more to himself than anyone else. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they were getting closer to safety, closer to the answers they needed. When they reached the safe house, it was as quiet as the world outside. They pulled up, the sound of their bikes fading as they dismounted. Jack motioned for everyone to stay low, keeping an eye on their surroundings. The world might have been asleep, but they knew better than to let their guard down. Inside, the small, dimly lit room felt more like a sanctuary than a hiding place. It was a tight fit, but it would do. They needed rest. Jack stood by the door, his mind still racing. There was so much to process, so much left to do. The government wasn't going to give up so easily. He knew that. But now, they had the leverage. They had the documents, the proof, the truth. They had the power. What now? Bear asked, breaking Jack's thoughts. Jack turned to him, meeting his gaze. Now, we take this to the world, Jack said. We make sure everyone knows what's been happening. We expose them. And if they come after us? Phantom asked, his voice calm but serious. Jack didn't hesitate. Then we fight, he said simply. We fight until the truth comes out. The others nodded, their resolve as strong as ever. They had been through hell, but they had made it. They had the truth now, and no one, not the government, not anyone, was going to take that away from them. Jack turned back to Maya, who had been standing quietly in the corner, watching them. You okay? Jack asked, his voice softer this time. Maya looked up at him, her face serious, but there was something in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before. I'm okay, she said, her voice steady. But I want to help. I don't want to just sit here. Jack smiled, proud of the strength she had shown. You will, he said. We all will. This isn't over. The group settled into the safe house, but Jack knew they couldn't stay long. The danger wasn't gone. It was just beginning. They had a fight ahead of them, a fight that would take everything they had. But as he looked around at his crew, Jack knew they were ready. They had come this far, and they weren't backing down now. The truth had been exposed, and now, it was time to make sure the world knew what had really happened. Jack took a deep breath and stood tall, ready for whatever came next. This fight wasn't just about survival. It was about justice. It was about making sure that the people who had tried to control everything would never win. They would fight for their freedom, for their lives, and for the truth. And they wouldn't stop until it was over. The war was just beginning. But Jack knew one thing for sure. They were going to win.